Blessings and good evening to you all. Tonight's program is an extended program because it's the funeral service for my father, Brian Jones, today. And around this time in the UK, they're also having a funeral service and his body will be cremated today. So it's the right time for us to have a service here. Myself, as the son of Brian, one of my duties is to perform a funeral service for my father. It's also Thursday, the 11th of June, and in Thai Buddhist tradition, Thursday is Teacher's Day, which is appropriate because my father's occupation, he was a teacher, and many people will remember him as a teacher. Just by coincidence, it's also the birth anniversary of Kruba Sivichai, a very famous Thai meditation master, widely respected in Thai Buddhist history. He died many years ago, but today was his birthday. And it just reminds us that every day of the year is a day that somebody is born, it's a day somebody dies. Birth and death, they come together as a package, part of human existence. Human life is bound up with birth and death. They come together. For my father, it's a time for his children. I have brother and sister and family members to recollect and remember his life. And as the Buddha pointed out, when we're born into the world, we must inevitably die. So we have to always constantly remind ourselves of that through our lives, through our own life, and through the life of our loved ones. We have to remind ourselves that one day we will separate through death. And that's a sad thing, but it's true. And how do we deal with that, as an emotion, as an experience? Well, one thing that helps us through the separation from our loved ones is recollecting their good qualities and the good they did in their life, rather than focusing on the loss, which of course will bring up the emotion of sadness, grief, but focusing more on the goodness of their life. And that's what we have been doing as a family, and that's partly what we're doing tonight. One great Buddhist master, Luang Por Dun, who was a friend of Luang Por Chah, he used to talk about life as like a candle. Human life is like a candle, like you see candles on the shrine. You light a candle, you don't know how fast it will wear down, burn out. Some candles burn down faster than others, depending on the wick, the kind of wax, the environment. If there's a lot of wind, candles will burn down fast. If it's in a building like this, indoors, then the candle will burn slower. So you don't know how fast or slow it will burn, but you know for sure that it will burn down, eventually will burn out and become extinguished. And the human life is like that. But while the candle is lit, there's flame, there's brightness, and that symbolizes the potential every human being has to do good in this world for themselves and for other people. And so when we remember my father, Brian, there's many, many good things we can remember about his life because he was a teacher, but not just a teacher, he was a father, a husband, a father, a son, a parent. So he did many good things for his family, for himself, for his family, and then for his students. He was a teacher at a very large school in South London, pretty much the whole of his teaching life. He actually began his teaching life almost by accident. It was during the war. He's somebody who came through the war, Second World War in UK, and when he finished his high school education, there was, of course, a shortage of teachers because many men had gone to the front and many women also were involved in the war effort, so there weren't many teachers around. So he was quickly drafted into teaching at the age of, I think, 18 or 19 into a high school. So he was only a few months older than the children he was teaching, which he said was quite a baptism of fire for being a teacher. If you know what high school kids are like, then to try and teach someone who's only a few months younger than you is not easy. But anyway, that set the course for his life, and later he took on this job in the school in London and spent his whole working life there. And that's how I remember him as a child growing up. But he wasn't just a teacher, he was also an educator. He wrote textbooks for kids and set exams, worked as a senior examiner for the Cambridge Board of Examiners. His speciality was biology, so it's one thing he passed on to his children, a love of nature, flora and fauna, and he was famous for taking us out on walks in the country, which I guess as a Buddhist monk kind of was my preparation for becoming a forest monk, Tudong monk. And we used to joke when him and my mum used to say we're going for a walk, we'd always ask, is this a mummy walk or a daddy walk? Because if it was a mummy walk, it would only be a couple of miles. If it was a daddy walk, it could be 5 or 10 miles. So we'd always ask that question because we'd come back from the walks he led exhausted. But he was keen that we learnt about life in many different ways. And he's well known, well loved by his students for that. He was more than just a teacher of a particular subject. You know, he was a mentor and a friend to many, many people. And it's interesting, over the last few weeks since he died, we've had messages of condolence from people all over the world, because many of his students were scattered around the world. Some of them studied with him 50 years ago, and they still remember him fondly, with love, respect, and are writing messages of condolence, which is possibly a testament to his character and his generosity as a human being. You know, he was somebody who was keen not just to help his family, but also other people, students, friends, colleagues, and people all around the world. So it's one thing I was brought up with, is being aware that there are other people in the world, not just in the UK or in London where I was brought up. He had and developed many friends around the world, so we were brought up with that sense of the whole world is one family, wherever you are in this world. And he would travel to Africa, South America, Asia. We were brought up with this sense that all the people in this world are similar. You know, whatever your colour of your skin, your background, your culture, your religion, whatever, we all have many things in common. You know, we all want to be happy. We don't want to suffer. We all want to improve ourselves as human beings. So the way his offering to the world was as an educator and helping people to bring out their potential through education. That was something he championed and put a lot of effort in his life, but also out of a sense of equality of human beings, men, women, young, old, whatever your background. He always wanted people to have that chance in education. It's funny, before I became a Buddhist monk, I travelled with a friend through Europe and Africa when I was about 18, just to find out about the world. And perhaps we were a little inexperienced or naive, but we went to the country of Uganda, which at that time was experiencing a civil war. So there was fighting everywhere. There was bombs and shooting every day. So it probably wasn't a very good place to go travelling, but nevertheless we did. And it was very strange that one day we were walking along the road in the capital, and there was a shop which I guess was selling educational materials, books and notebooks and pencils and pens and stuff. And on the street, just on the ground, was this huge pile of books, biology books, because my father was a biologist, textbooks written by my father, which kind of astonished us because we were in the middle of a very poor country experiencing civil war, and then I saw textbooks written by my own father just sitting in a pile on the side of the road, which was a surprise. But that was what he was like. He was encouraging people to learn about, particularly about biology, his subject, all over the world. And he encouraged people to push themselves, but not so much by forcing them, but he was just a very good example of somebody who used his time well. Like his family know he very rarely rested. He didn't have such a thing as a rest day or a holiday, really. He used every day, if it wasn't for working for the school or the education or marking exams, he would be doing house renovations or gardening or visiting people, helping people in different ways. He was a very active person. Get up before everyone else in the morning. He'd stay up later at night. So a very good example of somebody who used his time well for his own benefit and for the benefit of others. And one of the reasons his students remembered him and love him to this day is that he didn't just push his own knowledge or subjects, say like biology, onto them. He encouraged people in whatever they liked or were interested in or excelled in. So whether it was music or art, science or the arts, he encouraged people to develop what they were good at. So he's a very broad-minded person. I can remember when I was about 5 years old, lying in bed on a Saturday morning, listening to really loud rock guitar music live, because one of his students wasn't that interested in the academic side of things, but was a very skilled guitarist and went on to become somebody who made a lot of money and became well known in that industry. But the school had forbidden, because this is the 60s, 1960s, the school had forbidden that child to practice his guitar because it was thought of not as being not something very appropriate for a young man to be learning in those days. So they banned him, but because it was a weekend, my father quietly opened up a room and allowed him to practice very loudly for many hours, which made that kid very happy and very grateful. And many of his students were like that. They found that he encouraged them in many ways and was like an extra father to them on top of their own father. As far as me, another thing I remember, he was always encouraging us, as I said, to get out into nature, to learn about the world, society, the world, nature, and to push ourselves as kids, in the best way we could, whether it was through our studies or the things we were interested in. He would encourage us to really pursue our hobbies or interests, even if he didn't particularly agree or like them or know much about them. So like when I got into Buddhism, he never stopped me from doing that. He encouraged me in my meditation and the practice I did. I can remember one time when he was, I think it was his 45th year, which now seems a bit strange. It's a long time ago. I remember he had some doubts about his age. He said, I'm getting old. So he said this to the family once. We were on holiday in Switzerland because we had friends there, and he used to drive us all through the night, all through the day as a family to get to Switzerland very quickly and cheaply, and we'd go and visit these friends and stay with them for a while, sometimes in the summer. And he said, I'm 45 years old this year, I'm getting old, there'll be some things I won't be able to do again in my life. And as little kids, I was about 9 years old then, we agreed, he was getting old, because when you're only 9, you think 45 is very old. He actually lived till he was 94, so perhaps it wasn't that old. But anyway, he had that kind of sense he was getting older. So he said, for my 45th birthday present, I'm going to climb this mountain. We were staying in a friend's house at the bottom of a Swiss Alp, which is about 8,000 feet high. He said, I want to climb this mountain, but I want to do it with a friend. I want a friend, a companion, so I need a volunteer. And I was the youngest person in the room. There were quite a few kids because there were several families in this house, a lot of adults, a lot of kids. But I was the youngest, and I think everyone else had learned how to avoid things that they didn't want to do better than me. So as soon as he said that he needs a volunteer to climb the mountain, everyone stepped back. So that left me at the front as if I was volunteering. It's a bit like in a movie. I was caught out, so I had to become his companion climbing that mountain. And 8,000 feet is quite a lot when you're 9 and not very experienced mountain climber. So I managed to do it, which made him happy, but he had to put up with a lot of complaints and grumbling. But I completed it, and I'm quite grateful that he made me do that, because it made me learn how to climb mountains. And that was the kind of man he was. He would try and get us to do things to just push ourselves a little bit more, which was later in life I realized was quite a useful thing. As I said, he is somebody who was very broad-minded and encouraged people in the things that they liked and wanted to do. He didn't always try and make people just follow what he thought they should do. So when I got interested in Buddhism in my teens, he had no problems with that. He was happy for me to learn Buddhism, meditate. And then when I decided to go off to Thailand to become a monk, I'm fairly sure he didn't really want me to do it, because the day I left to go to Thailand, he actually cried, which made it harder to leave for the airport to go to Thailand. But he never stopped me in what I did. So when I became a young monk in Thailand, in those days the monasteries, they didn't have electricity, telephone, internet, so I had very little contact with my family for a number of years. But I always felt that they were supporting me in what I was doing, even though they didn't fully understand it, I don't think. But that helped. And when you become a Buddhist monk, one of the requirements is you have to have your parents' permission. So I did ask them for permission, and as I said, I don't think he really wanted me to be a monk, but he didn't stop me, and he gave me permission. So I'll always be grateful for that. And after staying in Thailand for a number of years as a monk, I finally persuaded my parents to come out and visit me, to see the monastery, to meet my teacher, Ajahn Chah, and see how Buddhist monks lived and what we did, because I wanted them to understand better. So they came, and I was very happy that I was able to take my parents to visit Luang Por Chah, our teacher, even though he was ill by then and wasn't speaking or teaching. I remember my father being at Ajahn Chah's kuti and observing how all of Ajahn Chah's monks looked after Ajahn Chah. We used to care for him, nurse him, look after him very well. And my father noticed that, and he said, you can't see, we haven't heard any teachings from Ajahn Chah, but you can see the quality of his teachings in the way his monks love and respect him and look after him. So he noticed that. He noticed the practice of the Sangha, he noticed the peaceful environment of the monastery. And I'm very grateful for that, for the fact that I managed to get him to at least see Ajahn Chah, see the monastery in those days. So my father always encouraged me and supported me in what I was doing as a monk. And he carried on his teaching career. Officially he retired when he was in his 60s, but he didn't actually stop working then. He carried on teaching, writing books, examining, doing work, and well into his 70s, 80s, and even in his early 90s, if I remember right, when he was 91 maybe, he was still teaching at the University of the Third Age. It's only the last year or so when he became more frail and ill that he really stopped most of his activities. So he's a very active person through his life, and made a lot of people very happy. A lot of people have very fond memories of him. So as a family, that's what we do. We recollect and remember the goodness of his life, even though it's sad to lose someone like that. I remember when Ajahn Chah passed away, that very same day, Lungta Mahabua, one of the contemporary meditation masters in Thailand, jumped in a car as soon as he heard the news that Ajahn Chah had died. He jumped in a car and drove for 5 hours to Wat Pah Pong, to Ajahn Chah's monastery, just to visit. And I was assigned with a couple of other monks to look after him. And I remember the first thing he said when he sat down in Wat Pah Pong next to Ajahn Chah's coffin. We'd already put him in a coffin. He said, I remember when my teacher died, Luang Por Man died. The first thing that happened was you have this very strong welling up of emotion when you lose your teacher, who is like everything to you. You have a strong emotional reaction. But then I thought to myself, well, what's the best way to honor my teacher and respond to the fact that he's now gone? I worked out that the best thing to do when someone you love and respect passes away is to do even more good than before, and to put more effort into your practice and do more good than before. Because when someone you love and respect dies, then it's a reminder that you don't have much time left yourself for your own practice. So he was telling us about that, and then he looked at me and he said, your teacher has died, Ajahn Chah has died. What are you going to do now? And out of respect, I didn't actually answer, I just looked at him. And he said, don't become a hungry ghost, just hanging around Ajahn Chah's chedi, sweeping and cleaning but not practicing. He said, when your teacher dies, you have to double your efforts in the practice. You have to meditate for longer hours. You have to try harder to practice mindfulness. You have to contemplate the Dhamma more than before. Do it more than before because your teacher has died. So maybe that's one Buddhist response to death is, even though death of a loved one is a sad affair, how do you respond? Well, you respond by doing even more good, both out of gratitude to your teacher or your parent, but also out of that sharp or keen awareness that life is impermanent. We're not going to be here forever. Our time is limited, and like the candle that is gradually burning down, soon it will be extinguished. So while we still have some flame, some brightness, some life in us, then we should use our time to do more good. Doing good means making more good karma through the practice of generosity and kindness towards oneself, one's fellow human beings. Keeping the precepts, listening to the Dhamma, chanting and meditating. And particularly the practice of meditation is something that you can always do, even to the very last breath of your life. You have the chance to practice mindfulness of your breathing. You have the chance to practice and contemplate impermanence. This very body that we reside in and depend on to do good, it doesn't last forever, and that in itself is a teaching. We really have to focus our minds back on this body and come to understand it's a physical formation. We call it a sankhara, a Gaya sankhara, and it's made up of 4 elements: the earth element, fire, water, air. And these elements don't really belong to anyone. They come together temporarily and form a human body, and we keep this body going with food and drink and breathe in the air of the world. But we don't really own this body. because it's just made up of natural elements which will eventually degenerate, break up and go back to the earth. So we have to contemplate that, because one of our biggest delusions as human beings is that we take ownership of this body, we believe it to be a self, me, mine, myself, my body. So of course when things go wrong with it, we suffer. We suffer just with the threat of illness, the worries, the anxiety. We suffer with physical aches and pains. We suffer with all the difficulties of earning a living, getting food, money to buy food, keep this body going, keep it warm and clothed, finding accommodation for it and keeping it pampered, always trying to find pleasant things to see and hear and touch and smell and so on. We get completely lost and deluded in this body, thinking of it as a self. And that really is the root cause of much of our suffering as human beings. So the Buddha encouraged us to practice mindfulness directed to the body. Ask ourselves questions every day. Do I really own this body or not? Or is it an impermanent mental formation, something that's subject to change, birth, aging, sickness and death? Because when we reflect like this, your mind becomes wiser and develops right view, and we see, oh, this body is ultimately something I have to let go of. We use it like a useful tool. We can use this body to do good things, but when the time comes, we're going to have to put it down. So better to contemplate that now, while you're healthy, alive, while you have the chance to meditate on this. Use that chance. Come to terms with the truth of impermanence, so that your time becomes valuable and worthwhile, so that you can use your life to do good things. It just shows you candles are impermanent and they gradually burn down. So maybe the burning down of the candle is a sign for the end of the Dhamma talk. I'll leave these reflections with you on this occasion. The funeral service of my father, Brian Jones, who around this time is being cremated in the UK. So we wish him well. In Buddhism we talk about sharing merit with the dead. So once somebody's passed away, there's no material thing you can do for them anymore, but you can keep on doing good things, and that happiness and good karma you generate, you can dedicate that to the dead. So for tonight we'll dedicate this ceremony, chanting, keeping the precepts, robe offerings, listening to the Dhamma, meditating. We'll dedicate this to Brian Jones. Maybe it be a cause for his happiness and progress in the Dhamma as he goes into his next life. May he find peace, may he find a good rebirth, and now the Sangha will give the final blessing. I'll invite Ajahn Kalyano to lead that.
Sapitiyo vivacantu sabbaroko vinasatu mate bhavatvatarayo sukhitirayo bhava abhivadana silisa nityam buddha pachayino Chataro Dhamma vadanti ayuvanno sukhaṃ bhalang จันติยาทโยอายัญจโคดากินาทินาสังกามิสุปฏิทิตาทิการทังหิตายาสัธรรมโสอุปกัปปติโสญาติธัมโมจายังนิทาสิโตเตตานาปุจจาจักตาหุราราบาลัญจภิกขุนานานุปาทินังตุเมหิปุญญังปัสสุทังอนาปกันติราคันตุสัพพเทวตาสัพพพุทธานุภาเวนะสัทธาโสทิภวันตุเตภวัตุสัพพมังคลังราคันตุสัพพเทวตาสัพพธัมมานุภาเวนะสัทธาโสทิภวันตุเตภวัตุสัพพมังคลังราคันตุสัพพเทวตาสัพพสังฆ